Hello everyone, my name is Rachel, and I'm 29 years old. I'm here today to share a story that was incredibly painful for me, a story about loss, betrayal, and finding strength in the most unexpected place, within myself and in the quiet space away from people who are supposed to love and support me. What happened was devastating, and the way my partner and his family reacted made it even worse. They completely ignored my pain, invalidated my feelings, and made me feel like I was losing my mind. But what happened next, how I finally stood up for myself and walked away from that toxic dynamic, was even more significant. I'm going to tell you the full story today, exactly as it happened. Before I dive in, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Also, if you've ever felt completely alone in your pain, even when surrounded by people, please hit the like button so I know I'm not alone in that experience. And if you want to hear more stories about navigating difficult relationships and finding your voice, make sure you subscribe to the channel. My life, before everything fell apart, felt relatively stable, if not perfect. I had been with my partner, Mark, for 5 years. We lived together in a small but cozy house that felt like ours, filled with worn furniture and the comforting scent of home-cooked meals. Mark was, or seemed to be, kind and steady. We had our disagreements, sure, who doesn't? But I thought we had a foundation of mutual respect and affection. We talked about the future, about getting married, maybe having kids someday. It felt like we were building a life together, brick by painstaking brick. A massive part of that life, a part that brought immeasurable joy and comfort, was our dog, Buddy. Buddy wasn't just a pet. He was my shadow, my confidant, my furry child. We had adopted him from a local shelter 7 years before I even met Mark. He was an older dog then, wise and gentle, with eyes that seemed to understand everything. He had been through some hardships before finding his way to me, and because of that, we had an unspoken bond, a deep understanding that transcended words. He was there for me through job changes, heartbreak, and all the small triumphs and failures that make up a life. When Mark moved in, Buddy accepted him with a wagging tail and a happy sigh, integrating him into our little pack. Mark seemed to like Buddy well enough. He'd pet him, take him for walks occasionally, and didn't complain about the dog hair or the occasional bark at the mailman. I thought they had a good relationship, a comfortable coexistence. Mark's family lived about an hour away. His parents, David and Susan, were traditional. They valued appearances, routine, and a certain level of emotional restraint that I found challenging to navigate. His sister, Sarah, was sharp-tongued and often seemed to compete with everyone around her, including me. I tried my best to fit in, attending family dinners, listening to their stories, offering help where I could. It was never easy, though. I always felt slightly judged, a little outside their tight-knit circle. Mark always told me I was imagining it, that they just weren't very outwardly emotional people. I wanted to believe him. Our life together ambled along, a comfortable rhythm of work, evenings on the couch with Buddy curled at our feet, weekend errands, and the occasional visit to Mark's family. I felt secure, or what I thought was secure. I believed I was loved, that I mattered to Mark, and that my feelings, my joys, and my sorrows were important to the person I shared my life with. This belief was about to be shattered in the most painful way. Buddy was getting old. We knew that. He had slowed down over the last year, his steps more hesitant, his naps longer. We had been managing some age-related health issues, making him comfortable, showering him with extra love and soft blankets. Even preparing for the inevitable heartbreak didn't lessen the blow when it came. One Tuesday morning, Buddy didn't greet me at the door with his usual gentle tail wag. He was lying in his bed, struggling to breathe.
Panic seized me.
I called the vet, tears already streaming down my face. Mark was at work, but I called him, voice trembling, telling him something was seriously wrong. He was calm on the phone, telling me to take him to the vet, that he'd try to leave work early. The drive to the vet was agonizing, Buddy resting his head weakly on my lap, his breath shallow. The news from the vet was not unexpected, but it ripped my world apart anyway. There was nothing more they could do. His organs were failing. He was in pain. The kindest thing, the only kind thing, was to let him go. The decision was immediate and heartbreaking. I held Buddy in my arms, burying my face in his fur, telling him how much I loved him, thanking him for everything as the vet administered the injection. He drifted off peacefully, his last breath a gentle sigh. The silence in the room after he was gone was deafening. The weight of his body in my arms felt suddenly heavy, final. I stayed with him for a long time, unable to move, unable to process the enormity of the loss. This wasn't just a pet dying. It felt like a part of myself was gone. A constant, unconditional source of love and comfort had vanished. I finally managed to call Mark. My voice was thick with tears, barely able to speak the words. He's gone. Buddy's gone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A beat of silence that felt like an eternity. Then, Mark's voice, flat and controlled, came through the receiver. Okay, that's tough. Are you going to be able to get home? I'm still swamped here. Swamped.
He was swamped.
My world had just imploded, and his primary concern was whether I could manage the drive home, because he was swamped. I mumbled that I would be fine and hung up. The coldness of his response was a second blow, landing square in my chest just moments after the first. I expected him to drop everything, to rush to be with me, to offer comfort, to acknowledge the depth of my pain. Instead, I got a practical question about my commute and an excuse about work. I drove home in a daze, the empty house echoing with Buddy's absence. His food bowl, his leash by the door, his favorite toy under the coffee table. Each reminder was a fresh wave of grief. I sat on the floor and wept, the kind of gut-wrenching sobs that leave you breathless and aching. Mark came home much later that evening. He found me on the couch, wrapped in one of Buddy's blankets, eyes swollen and red. He sat down beside me, awkwardly patting my knee. Still upset, huh? He said, not unkindly, but with a detached air that felt alien. He was my best friend, Mark. I choked out, fresh tears falling. 7 years before you, plus the 5 we were together. He was family. Yeah, I know, Mark said, standing up. It's sad. But he was just a dog, Rachel.
He was old and sick. It was his time.
It's not like a person died. He went into the kitchen to get a drink, leaving me alone with my grief and his astonishing lack of empathy. Just a dog. The words hit me like physical blows. Just a dog. Was that all Buddy was to him? Was that all my pain was to him? Something to be minimized, dismissed, compared unfavorably to real loss? The pain of losing Buddy was intertwined with a new, bewildering pain. The pain of realizing the person I shared my life with didn't understand, didn't care enough to try to understand, the depth of my sorrow. Over the next few days, my grief was a constant companion. I cried frequently, felt lethargic, and struggled to do basic things like eat or sleep. The house felt hollow. I missed Buddy's presence acutely, the sound of his nails on the floor, his sigh when he settled down, the way he'd lean against my legs. Mark's reaction didn't improve. He seemed impatient with my sadness. If I cried, he'd sigh heavily or leave the room. If I talked about a memory of Buddy, he'd change the subject. He expected me to snap back to normal quickly, to move on, because it was just a dog. One evening, I was particularly distraught. I hadn't been sleeping and felt raw with emotion. I tried to talk to Mark about how lost I felt, how quiet the house was, how much I missed Buddy's unconditional love. Rachel, honestly, this is getting a bit much, he said, his voice tight with frustration. It's been nearly a week. People lose pets all the time. They don't fall apart like this. I'm not falling apart, I said, my voice rising.
I'm grieving.
He was important to me. Yes, and it's sad, but you're acting like someone died. He repeated the phrase that cut me so deeply. You're moping around, you're not sleeping, you're barely eating. It's not healthy. You need to just get over it. Get over it. The casual cruelty of that phrase from the person who was supposed to be my partner was stunning. It wasn't just that he didn't understand. It was that he actively dismissed my feelings and then instructed me to suppress them for his convenience. This wasn't just ignorance. It felt like a deliberate invalidation of my emotional reality. Feeling desperate, I even reached out to his family, thinking perhaps talking to anyone who knew Buddy might help. I called Mark's mother, Susan, a few days after Buddy passed. I was still tearful when I spoke to her. I explained what happened and how heartbroken I was. Her response was polite, but utterly devoid of warmth or understanding. "Oh, yes," Mark mentioned. "The old dog. Well, that's a shame, dear. Are you coming over for dinner on Sunday? Sarah is bringing her new boyfriend, and we'd love for you both to be here." No offer of sympathy, no acknowledgement of my pain, just a quick transition to social plans. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just Mark, it was the whole family dynamic. Emotion, unless it was carefully controlled and presented, was unwelcome. My raw grief certainly didn't fit into their neat world. It was another layer of betrayal, another confirmation that my feelings were not important to the people who were supposed to be closest to me. I began to understand that my relationship with Mark wasn't the secure haven I thought it was. If he couldn't be there for me during a time of profound personal loss, when could I count on him? His inability or unwillingness to offer basic empathy was a gaping hole in the foundation of our relationship. It wasn't just about Buddy's death anymore. It was about a fundamental difference in how we saw the world and how we related to each other's vulnerability. The lack of support intensified my grief and layered it with confusion, anger, and a deep sense of loneliness. I felt like I was drowning, and the person who was supposed to be my lifeline was standing on the shore, telling me to stop being so dramatic. I started withdrawing. What was the point of sharing my feelings if they were only met with dismissal? What was the point of trying to explain my pain if it was deemed too much? The atmosphere in the house became strained. We walked on eggshells around each other. Mark was annoyed by my sadness, and I was hurt and resentful of his coldness. Simple conversations turned into arguments. "You're still not yourself," he'd complain. "This isn't fair to me. I feel like I'm living with a ghost. Maybe if you had shown me an ounce of empathy, I wouldn't feel so alone," I retorted one evening, the words sharp with pain. "Empathy? I told you I was sorry," he shot back, frustrated. "What else was I supposed to do? Cry with you over a dog?" His words were a punch to the gut. Cry with you over a dog? It encapsulated his entire attitude, dismissive, belittling, cruel. It wasn't just that he didn't understand. He actively ridiculed the idea of showing genuine emotion for my loss. I started spending more time alone. I'd go for long walks by myself, just to escape the stifling atmosphere of the house and Mark's impatient glances. I found solace in being by myself, processing my grief without commentary or judgment. In solitude, my feelings were valid. There was no one to tell me I was being too much or to get over it. It was during these solitary moments that a realization began to dawn on me. The strength I was desperately seeking from Mark and his family was never going to come from them. It had to come from me. This was the turning point. I stopped trying to make them understand. I stopped hoping for an apology or a moment of profound empathy from Mark. It was like accepting that a well was dry. No matter how much I lowered my bucket, I wouldn't find water there. This acceptance was painful, a recognition of the fundamental limitations of the people I had relied on, but it was also liberating. It freed me from the exhausting cycle of seeking validation where it didn't exist. With this realization came a shift in my behavior. I began setting boundaries, not just for them, but for myself. I stopped sharing my feelings about Buddy or really any deep feelings with Mark. When he made dismissive comments, instead of arguing or pleading, I simply stated how his words made me feel and then changed the subject or removed myself from the conversation. "When you say get over it, it makes me feel like my pain isn't important," I said calmly one day after he made yet another comment about my mood.
He scoffed.
"Oh, here we go. Everything's about your feelings." "My feelings are important to me," I responded, holding his gaze. "And if they aren't important to you, that's something we need to acknowledge." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stated a fact. His reaction was surprise, then irritation. He wasn't used to me being so direct and unwavering. Setting boundaries with his family was even simpler. I minimized contact. I started declining some invitations to family dinners, citing vague reasons like not feeling well or having other plans. When we did see them, I kept conversations light and steered clear of any topic that might touch upon my emotional state or the past few difficult months. Sarah made a sarcastic comment about me being antisocial at one gathering. "I'm just taking some time for myself right now," I replied evenly. We all deal with things differently. Again, no argument, no lengthy explanation, just a simple, firm statement that put the focus back on my needs without inviting debate. This period of boundary setting felt like building a protective wall around myself. It wasn't about shutting everyone out forever, but about creating a safe space where I could heal and rebuild without the constant erosion of toxic interactions. It was lonely at times, deliberately choosing solitude over hurtful company, but it was also incredibly empowering. Each boundary I set, each time I chose my own well-being over their comfort or approval, felt like a small victory. I started actively focusing on myself. I reconnected with old friends who offered genuine support. I started therapy, which was crucial in processing my grief and the added trauma of the invalidation I experienced. My therapist helped me understand that my reaction to Buddy's death was normal and healthy, and that Mark and his family's response was the problem, not me. This external validation was incredibly healing after months of being told my feelings were excessive or wrong. I also began to see other patterns in my relationship with Mark more clearly. The lack of empathy wasn't limited to Buddy's death. I started noticing other times he had minimized my concerns, dismissed my achievements, or centered his own needs over mine. His family's emotional unavailability was also a recurring theme I had previously tried to ignore or excuse. The grief over Buddy and their reaction to it had peeled back layers, revealing deeper issues in these relationships that I could no longer pretend weren't there. My growing strength and independence didn't go unnoticed. Mark seemed confused and annoyed by my shift. He preferred the version of me who sought his approval and needed his limited comfort. The version of me who was becoming self-possessed and less reliant on him was a challenge to his view of our relationship. The tension in the house escalated again, but this time, I was different. I wasn't pleading for understanding. I was asserting my reality. Arguments no longer left me shattered and questioning myself. Instead, they solidified my resolve. "You've changed, Rachel," he said accusingly one night. "You're distant. You're not the same person I fell in love with." "Yes, I've changed," I agreed, looking him straight in the eye. "I've learned that I can't rely on you for emotional support when I need it most. I've learned that my pain makes you uncomfortable, and you'd rather I just hide it. And I've learned that I deserve better than that." This was it, the beginning of the end, the major confrontation I had been building towards internally. It wasn't planned, but the words flowed out of me, clear and strong. I wasn't attacking him. I was simply stating the truth of my experience within our relationship. "What are you even talking about?" he blustered, trying to deflect. "Because of the dog. It's not just because of Buddy, Mark. It started there, because your reaction showed me who you really are when things get tough. But it's about everything. It's about how you dismiss my feelings, how your family dismisses my feelings, how I've felt like I don't truly belong or matter in your life, not the real me with real emotions and real pain. I needed you, and you weren't there. You didn't just ignore my loss. You invalidated me as a person." He didn't have a response that held any weight. He tried to argue, to minimize, to turn it back on me, saying I was being overly sensitive or dramatic again. But his words bounced off the new, stronger version of myself. I saw his attempts at manipulation and dismissal for what they were, defenses of someone who couldn't handle emotional vulnerability, either his own or mine. "I can't do this anymore, Mark," I said, the finality in my voice surprising us both. "I can't be in a relationship where I feel invisible and where my pain is treated with impatience and contempt. I deserve to be with someone who has empathy, who sees me, who supports me. And that's not you. We need to end this." His face went slack with shock. He hadn't expected me to leave. He had likely thought I would continue to accept his behavior, to tamp down my feelings, to try harder to fit into his world. But I had reached the point of no return. The strength I had found in solitude, in reclaiming my own worth, was enough to finally walk away. Ending a 5-year relationship and preparing to move out was incredibly difficult and painful, even though I knew it was the right decision. There were logistical hurdles, shared possessions to divide, and the emotional toll of dismantling a life we had built. Mark swung between anger, disbelief, and attempts to convince me to stay, none of which were genuine apologies or promises of change. He still didn't truly understand why I was leaving, focusing on the dog as the sole irrational reason, rather than the fundamental lack of connection and empathy that had become unbearable. His family's reaction was predictable, a mixture of confusion and subtle disapproval. They didn't understand why I would leave such a stable relationship, especially not over something as trivial in their eyes as a pet. Sarah made a few pointed remarks to Mark about me being high maintenance. David and Susan were more reserved, offering Mark condolences for the breakup, but not reaching out to me at all. It was a stark confirmation of my position outside their circle and their continued inability to see my perspective or value my feelings. Moving out was physically and emotionally exhausting, but each box I packed, each piece of furniture I moved, felt like shedding a skin. I found a small apartment for myself. It was empty and quiet at first, a stark contrast to the home I had shared with Mark and Buddy, but it was mine. There was no tension in the air, no judgment in the silence. It was a space where I could simply be, with my grief, with my newfound strength, without apology. The immediate aftermath of the breakup was tough. There were moments of doubt, loneliness, and sadness for the future I had lost, not just with Mark, but the future I had imagined with Buddy still by my side. But underlying that sadness was a sense of profound relief and a quiet pride. I had honored my feelings. I had stood up for myself. I had chosen my well-being over staying in a relationship that was chipping away at my soul. My relationship with Mark ended completely. We had no reason to stay in contact, and the lack of a genuine attempt at reconciliation from his side confirmed that my decision was necessary. The dynamic with his family also changed drastically. We became estranged. There were no more awkward dinners or strained holiday gatherings. While the loss of potential family connections stung a little, the peace that came with removing myself from their judgmental and emotionally distant environment was immense. I realized I hadn't lost a supportive family. I had simply stopped trying to force a connection that was never truly there. In the solitude of my new apartment, I continued to heal. The grief for Buddy still came in waves, but now I could ride those waves without shame or fear of judgment. I talked about him with my friends, looked at his pictures, and remembered the joy he brought into my life. My pain was no longer a burden I had to hide. It was a testament to the depth of my love. The journey from feeling utterly alone and invalidated to finding my own strength was long and challenging. It taught me painful lessons about the limitations of others and the importance of trusting my own feelings. It showed me that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most, not necessarily out of malice, but out of their own inability or unwillingness to connect with you on an emotional level. Finding strength in solitude wasn't about becoming a recluse. It was about becoming comfortable and confident in my own company, about learning that my worth wasn't dependent on external validation, and about realizing that being alone was infinitely better than being with people who made me feel less than. It was about discovering that the well of strength I needed was inside me all along, waiting to be tapped. My experience taught me the critical importance of boundaries, not just setting them for others, but for yourself. It taught me that it is okay, necessary even, to walk away from relationships, regardless of how long they've lasted or how intertwined your lives are, if they are fundamentally toxic to your well-being. It taught me that grief takes its own time and path, and no one has the right to tell you how or when to get over it. Today, I am in a much better place. The pain of losing Buddy is still there, a soft ache rather than a sharp wound, a reminder of the beautiful love we shared. The pain of the betrayal by Mark and his family has faded, replaced by a quiet understanding of who they are and who I need to be for myself. I am building a life grounded in authenticity and self-respect. My relationships are with people who see me, hear me, and validate my experiences, both the joyful and the painful. Thank you for listening to my story today. It was hard to revisit some of these moments, but I hope that by sharing my experience, someone else out there who is feeling alone in their pain might feel a little less so. If anything in my story resonated with you, particularly the feeling of having your pain dismissed or needing to find strength within yourself, please share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. I read as many as I can, and it helps to build a community of understanding. If this story touched you, or if you've faced similar challenges, please hit that like button to support the channel. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about navigating toxic relationships, setting boundaries, and finding your own path to healing and empowerment. Remember, your feelings are valid, your pain is real, and you have the strength within you to overcome even the most challenging betrayals. Speak your truth, set your boundaries, and never apologize for needing to heal. You are not alone.